Hello, today we're going to discuss the double slit experiment, and I'm going to explain why things have gotten completely out of control with this experiment. Many of you will have watched the other video on charge and polarity and the understanding that comes with the interpretation of my interpretation of Dirac's equation, where it is charge and polarity. And I'll redo it again here real quick. The output to Dirac's equation really had four outputs, and those four outputs are polarity along this line and charge along this line, and polarity and charge are opposite each other, and they're quad outputs in thirds, which means this is 0/3, this is 1/3, this is 2/3, and this is 3/3. And the reason that this is important is because when we discuss the double slit experiment, what you're really looking at is charge and polarity. And the reason that there is so much controversy over the double slit experiment is because of polarity, and you're having a hard time understanding polarity. Polarity is 0/3 and 3/3, 1/3 and 2/3 is charge. And the way that this comes out when you look at an orbital field is that this is monopole, this is dipole, and this is positive and negative charge. And the real interpretation of the double slit experiment is about polarity. It's not about charge, and it's not about the wave function. So let me show you how that works so that we're all on the same page. If you have a wave making apparatus here, and let's just make this like a bar on top of water that's pushing down and up, you create waves that go out. And if you put double slits in a wall, in a barrier here, then through this starts coming, waves make it through here, and waves make it through here, and they interfere here so that on the back wall you get lines, a lot of them here, few here, less here, even, almost none here and here. So you get these lines, and the way that it's described is polarity. Probability. And it is probability, no doubt. But the Copenhagen interpretation suggests that there is some time travel going on where after you do an experiment like this, if you take the double slit experiment and instead of sending waves through it from a wave machine like this, if you just send a particle through it, like you put a little electron gun back here and you fire a single electron through, it still makes the wave pattern against this back wall. And they say that this shouldn't happen. In order for this to happen, according to the Copenhagen interpretation, what would have to happen is the particle would have to leave the gun, travel through one of the things, and then basically go back following every path, then go back in time and choose one path. It's insane, literally insane. So what do I understand about polarity, as I started to explain with the Dirac's equation, one, the other, neither, and both, polarity and charge, that they're not seeing? So first of all, I am absolutely a de Broglie-Bohm mechanics person. Only I have to add to it because de Broglie came out with his pilot wave theory, and Bohr and Heisenberg basically made fun of him and said that can't be, and he ended up withdrawing it, saying, okay, you must be right. It's probability. It's a wave function, and probability is not actual particles. And later, in the 50s, I think, Bohm came along and he said, basically he built a model and it said basically the same thing as de Broglie. And so when he found de Broglie, he's like, it is a wave function. but you have to add a guiding part to the equation in order for it to function properly, and a lot of the mathematicians didn't like that. And again, the Copenhagen interpretation, the people that follow that said, you are absolutely wrong, and he withdrew his theory and said, you know what, I guess I'm mistaken. Well, I'm here to tell you that de Broglie was right, Bohm was right, and I'm right. And I actually came to my interpretation and then found, Bohmian mechanics and then de Broglie. And when I saw both of them, in my mind, fireworks were going off. Like, absolutely, these are the guys that solve the problem. Why they would change their mind, I'm about to explain to you. When you fire an electron gun through here, there's no reason, according to the Copenhagen interpretation and the people who believe in it, that it should make a wave pattern back here, right? That there's no possible way, there's no understanding that would allow that to happen. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you, oops, use that page already. I'm going to show you how this functions. I tell you everything is either a monopole or a dipole, and this is all you're really seeing when you do the double slit experiment. If you have a double slit, right, here and here, and you pass a wave through it, it is a monopole wave. What do I mean by that? Well, it's like if you have a circle here, the waves leaving it will go out in a circle. And these look like what are called pilot waves. Okay? So if you're only looking at this half, just like it goes through a single slit, you're going to get arcing, right, waves through this slit and arcing waves through this slit, and they're going to interfere here. And this is where two waves, die waves, two, create the wave pattern against this back wall. So it's a monopole wave that you're creating a dipole for, right? That's why you get the interference pattern. It's logical. It makes sense. Here's the thing. If, on the other hand, you have the same experiment, let's draw another one here. And this time, you have an electron gun back here. And you fire the gun, and the electron, the particle, passes through as a particle, a single particle. You still get the interference patterns against this wall back here. And that doesn't make sense according to the Copenhagen interpretation unless there is a probability built into the system. Now, the reason that de Broglie and Bohm's theories weren't met is because it would require something called hidden variables. Now, I tell you that the output to Dirac's equation is charge and polarity, and that's what we're looking at. And electrons are negatively charged, and they are magnetic dipoles, I say. According to my theory, they're magnetic dipoles, and that the final magnetic dipole model is an antipole, and I've talked about them before. I have a video on it if you want to look at that. But the dipole is inherent in the particle because it's a dipole. It's a force dipole or a magnetic dipole. So I say that the electron is an antipole structure, and that a charged dipole, like a proton, is that same antipole inverted to create the mass and the charge of the charged dipole of the proton, let's say. So if you fire an electron through here, another antipole that is big that you can see is Jupiter. And I know, people disagree, but it is an antipole, and this is what an antipole looks like. So this interior moon-making structure means Jupiter is birthing moons. It's actually creating moons inside, and when you give them energy, they go faster and faster, and they move outward in the system until they leave the atmosphere of Jupiter, and they're birthed. literally. So what would that mean here? Well, it means that just like Jupiter is an antipole that can birth moons like this, it is a force out, charge in system, just like electrons, just like our universe, just like molecular oxygen in the atmosphere, which I'll explain in a second. And if that's true, and it is, then this antipole structure has the wave function internal to the particle. So Jupiter is an antipole, it's a particle, but its wave function is inside the particle. So I'm saying that Jupiter, our universe, molecular oxygen in our atmosphere, and electrons are dipole magnets, magnetic dipoles, or what I call force dipole, because in every magnitude it's not magnetic, but it's always force. So I call them force dipoles, you call them magnetic dipoles. But in this case, the electron is a magnetic dipole. So why do you get interference pattern here? And why would you get it with only a single particle going through here, one at a time? Well, the dipole is in the particle when you're firing it out of an electron gun. And so the wave pattern is internal. It's a function of the internal magnetic dipole of the electron. You only need the particle. The dipole is inherent to it. This way is a monopole. Now, when I said the moon is a magnetic monopole and that its magnetic field lines were circular around it, this is all we're looking at here. If you look at this, you'll see that if you have a circle and it's creating a wave pattern, that the circles are just expanding outward, like pilot waves or like standing pilot waves, which I changed to Broglie's theory slightly. I don't say pilot waves, I say standing pilot waves. But for now, that's what you have. You just have circular field lines around this particle. Whereas the electron gun, you have no field lines, but they're internal to the electron because it's a dipole. So by firing an electron through here, you get the outcome of the dipole that's internal to the electron. Where in this case, you require two slits. Well, by firing through this, you have a dipole particle through a single slit. You still get the wave pattern. You have a single monopole wave, right, going through two slits. This is where you gain the dipole. This is your dipole added to your waves, right? You have a monopole wave, adding two together, you get dipoles. You're turning a single wave into two waves, you now have a dipole wave. In this case, you have a particle, a single particle, but you still have the dipole. It's inherent to the electron. So how do I know that this functions this way? Well, it's because orbital fields work this way, and it's the outcome, right, to the orbital field, the output to the orbital field is Maxwell's equations. So each of Maxwell's equations is, and I'm going to do a video on this, but I'll cover it right now. If you have a particle and it's in motion, particles are being pushed out of the way in front of it, so you have force out, you have charge going in, and then behind it you have force in and charge going out. And that creates a plane of density right here. And across this plane, you have the quad outputs, which is Dirac's equation, which is charge and polarity created here and here and here and here. And this is monopole, and this is dipole, and this is positive charge, and this is negative charge. All right? And what happens is when you're looking at the double slit experiment, or when you're looking at this orbital field, if you take and you follow a helical path out of here, it goes charge dipole, charge monopole, magnetic dipole, and it's a helix, so then it starts over as you expand outward. And the thing is if you look at Maxwell's equations, what you get is 4 equations, and those 4 equations represent those 4 particles. Let me say it again. Charge dipole, charge monopole, magnetic monopole, magnetic dipole. And each of Maxwell's equations represent one of those. So the reason that we call them Maxwell's equations is because he found an orthogonal connection, a symmetry, a 90-degree connection between Ampere's and Faraday's equation. The thing is if they're a helix, they all have orthogonal connections between them. If you follow them out from a core, the proof that my theory is right, that orbital fields are correct, is that the output to the orbital field is Maxwell's equations. So 4 particles, 90-degree rotation, orthogonal connection between each is 360 degrees, which is what your helix is as it leaves. So what you're getting here is Maxwell's equations as the output to this orbital field. And since I have seen the end of this, I've gone through all of this and come out the other side, and on the other side of this you realize those are the only 4 particles in all of creation, in all the universe. And it's the reason we can't understand atoms perfectly, and it's the reason we can't understand molecules perfectly, because there are 4 types of atoms, and they are charge dipole, charge monopole, magnetic dipole. There are 4 kinds of molecules, right? And they are right? Charge dipole, charge monopole, magnetic dipole. There are 4 types of particles in the macroverse, in our solar system, right? There are, you guessed it, charge dipoles, charge monopoles, magnetic dipoles. They are all orthogonal to each other, right? So while Maxwell found 1 orthogonal connection, there are 4. I'm telling you, I know, I've seen it. It's the output. And 4 by 90 degrees is a 360-degree helix in which all of Maxwell's equations become a particle. So an electron fired through here has a dipole, and you will get the pattern back here. Now you want to prove me wrong, you want to prove experimentally that this works. If you fire an electron, it will create the pattern. Okay? And if you fire a proton, you should still get this same pattern. Why? Well, because they're both dipoles. Protons are charged dipoles, and electrons are magnetic dipoles. And the difference between the two is the electron is an antipole, and the proton is a piece of dark matter, a chemtron structure, that has had the electron inverted around it to create the dipole. So any particle that's a dipole will create this pattern on the back wall, even if you fire them one at a time, because the dipole particle is inherent, right? The wave function is inside the particle and controls its motion, even from inside. Whereas out here, you get the wave pattern, but only because you have a monopole with 2 slits. Well, there's a reason they call it a double slit experiment, not a single slit experiment. If you do it with 1 slit, you get no interference pattern because it's a monopole structure. 2 slits mean you have an interference pattern by the dipole. So if you have a monopole going through here, you get dipole in the structure of the experiment. If you have a single particle going through here, the only way you're going to get the output of a wave pattern is if it's a dipole. The electron is an antipole, right? And the antipole can create, carries the dipole charge internal of the particle. And the proton is a charged dipole and carries it external, right, in the atmosphere. So this is the double slit experiment, and the hidden variables are in the dipole. It's in the dipole charge of the proton, and it's in the magnetic dipole internal wave function of the electron. So this whole Copenhagen interpretation where, the particle must follow every possible path and then go back in time and choose the path of least action and It's all bullshit. It could not be more complicated the way that they do it, and it couldn't be simpler the way I'm trying to explain it. Why is it a double slit experiment? Because it's a dipole. You're creating a dipole, which then gives you the interference pattern. If you shoot a single particle that is already a dipole, the interference pattern is in the particle. It's carried with the particle. That's it. There's nothing else. This is absolutely a new interpretation of the double slit experiment that agrees with Bohm and de Broglie and me and completely refutes the Copenhagen interpretation. Period.